Electricity Minister, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, recently announced government's plans to start the process of generating 2,500 megawatts of new nuclear energy in 2032 or around about 2023, or 2033, I beg your pardon. Currently, South Africa's only nuclear power station is Koeberg, and it has a capacity of around 1,840 megawatts. Now, this is in an effort, of course, to address the country's ongoing power crisis. However, some experts have questioned whether the country can actually afford to rely or switch to nuclear energy. Let's get you more analysis. Bring in Hügo Krüger, who's a civil nuclear engineer from Truth and Energy, and joins us now via our video link. And Hügo, it's always great having you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Depending on who you ask, this is either a good or bad idea. Those against us going in this direction are citing the massive capital costs of getting a nuclear power station set up and going. But those who are for it speak about supposedly the relatively lower unit cost of generating energy using nuclear. Where should we stand on this?
So I'm just going to give you the facts. My background is in civil nuclear engineering. I did my master's in it, so I do think I know what I'm talking about here. There's three numbers to remember in nuclear: 10,000, 6,000, 3,000. Okay, that's dollars per kilowatt of electricity. Or you can say $10 billion, $6 billion, $3 billion per gigawatt. Okay, so you have to multiply that by 2. Okay, and that is the range that nuclear plants cost for. The first number, the 10,000, if you buy it from France and the United States of America, which I argue South Africa should not do, it's too expensive. The other numbers usually come in somewhere if you buy from Russia, from China, from South Korea. And then India is also building at an affordable rate, but I don't think they're selling in the export market yet, so is Canada. So if I go based on the numbers that Egypt paid for the Russian plant, it is about 4.5 billion per gigawatt, so it would be 9 billion if South Africa buys 2 gigawatt plant. And then when you ask how much does it cost in unit of electricity, that's a far more difficult calculation to do, simply because it depends on the interest rate that we get. Now, the fortunate thing about nuclear power is when you look at country-to-country transactions, okay, those contracts tend to be much better than within a country. So when France and the United States build a plant, they absorb the overruns. Okay, and that's what people are afraid of. But if you have a country-to-country transaction, the guy who builds it has to absorb the overruns. Right. So it doesn't come onto South Africa's balance sheet. And that's what we need to negotiate for. And generally how it's done is through low interest loans through export credit agencies. So if South Africa buys a plant at the current export credit agency rate that Eskom gets, it's less than 2%. That means that country's export credit agency will absorb the risk. We don't absorb the overrun risk. And that makes it a solid investment for South Africa.
Sure. Do the savings go far enough? I mean, well, let me rephrase that question. Does that justify our going into nuclear, though? I mean, you know, in your mind, is that the only concern we should have around the costs here?
Yes. I mean, people have been complaining only about the cost because they stopped complaining about safety because it made them look, they realized how ridiculous it makes them look, because nuclear kills fewer people per unit of energy than any other source in the world at the moment. But it generally comes down to the cost, but I argue the contractual conditions. Under what conditions are we building it and from who are we buying it? And honestly, these answers nobody knows, because the request for proposal is coming out. Of all those 5 or 6 countries that can build, they can do it. Now, I want to add something else here, which I think is important to highlight. South Korea built a power station in the United Arab Emirates. 150 South Africans worked on that plant. So we have the skills. And if we build a nuclear power plant in either in the Eastern Cape, which I believe is the ideal location, Tayspint, it brings investment to that community, and we can help reverse the brain drain, right? Because it's some of the best skills that go and help and build in another country. If our engineers are good enough to build a power plant in another country, why can't they do that back home? That is what I'm asking. Yeah.
There's going to be obvious questions about where that money will come from, no matter how much it costs. I mean, it depends whether or not people reckon that the price tag is justifiable. I think that's a separate debate. But no matter what the actual figure is, there's genuine concerns about where we're going to get it from.
Well, say the export credit agencies or national banks loan you the money and you start paying them back in tariffs afterwards. But it's usually an 85-15 split. So it's that large sum of money times 15%. That's what South Africa has to raise locally. And when I speak to economists, they say we can completely afford it. even under the current debt conditions of South Africa. I would say 1 or 2 plants we can afford. I don't think we can afford a mass-built, thing that France did in the 1970s or 80s. But it's completely affordable. I mean, if South Africa can spend about the equivalent money on transmission lines to accommodate the renewables, right, which is what we get loans for across the world, I'm pretty sure we can do it for 1 or 2 nuclear power plants. And what this comes down to, in my view, is the grid is a natural monopoly. And there's a lot of interest against nuclear power because it will lock them out of the grid of selling electricity. And my view has always been South Africa needs a mixed energy system. We need to accommodate each other. And again, the money for this thing is completely affordable if done under the right banking conditions and financial conditions. I have to repeat that.
Sure, absolutely. The kind of timelines we're given is that even if we were to start on this tomorrow, we're looking at around 10 years before we start reaping the benefits. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Yes, it depends which country you look at again. The UAE got it in 7 years, but South Africans building it in 7 years, by the way. But let's say 7 to 10 years to be safe, because things don't always go as well as it should. So that sounds reasonable to me. And then I have to point out, a nuclear power plant, you don't usually build it for yourself. You build it for your grandchildren. Right. Koeberg was built in the 1980s. The loan took about 18 years to repay, and it's after the loan repays itself that Koeberg now has the cheapest electricity per unit cost in South Africa. So yes, for the first 18 years, South Africa will be paying back on that loan, probably at Eskom's tariff. I don't think it will impact electricity prices much. And then afterwards, it falls remarkably well. So you do it for the long-term investment into a country's future.
Right.
That's how you need to look at a nuclear power plant.
The skeptics among us are, suggesting that the announcement being made now is in relation to the elections next year. The governing party is seemingly coming across as if they're doing something. How worried are you, though, about some kind of political expediency muddying the waters when it comes to some of those contractual issues that you reckon we should be clinical about in order for this to be worth our while?
Well, as I understand it, the decision will only be made after the elections next year. But yeah, look, let's face it, it's elections next year. Everything is done for political reasons before an election. Okay, and the DA is also opposing it for political reasons now. What I worried about is that if we have a change of government or coalition government or anything of that sort, then they derail the whole project. Because unfortunately, it's now that this has become a factional issue in South African politics, and it shouldn't be. It should just be investment for the long term. The question should be, can we afford it economically or not, right? But energy never works that way. So I can't really give you a straight answer on that, other than to say I am concerned that people might rush it or people might oppose it out of spite.
Because, let's face it, even the electricity minister himself admitted that the last time we kind of tried to embark on this massive kind of nuclear project, it was mired in controversy. And at the very least, surely there are lessons to be learned about what went so horribly wrong then and what we should do now in order to avert that.
Yeah, so last time it was a 9.6 gigawatt, now it's 2, so it's a lot less than what we would have built last time. But the trillion number that they keep on throwing around in the media, we still don't know where that comes from. And there was never a solid evidence of an agreement with Russia at the time. What South Africa did is we signed cooperative agreements with Russia and Japan and the United States and other countries. And then the media ran with the story that the Russians are coming, which is complete nonsense in my view. Because I know personally that the French wanted to tender on that deal, because I was in France at the time doing my master's. But, it remains to be seen who would get the deal. So the problem I have is that the media might run away with the story saying we've already made a deal when no deal is being made, right? That can be a major concern in this thing. I would just say let's wait for the request for proposal. Nobody can give you a straight answer how much it costs. I've got ideas based on what it costs in other countries. And then based on those numbers, we come back and we react and we say, can we or can we not afford it? That's how we should look at this deal.
All right. Sobering take. Hügo Krüger, as always, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate it. Hügo speaking to us there as a civil nuclear engineer with Truth and Energy. And yeah, let's wait and see how it all unfolds.